Yeah.
Okay. Wow, this is it. Jana and I were talking earlier today. It's like, wow, it's finally here. We've been kind of waiting for this day for a really long time. So I'm super glad to see you guys here and for Jana to share with us all that she's going to share with us. I'm really excited for this first interview. And if you're on the block and you're watching this recording later, we're really glad that you're doing that. I think this will be a real blessing to everyone here. Just a couple of things, just housekeeping things real quick. And this morning I created a collaborative Google Doc. It's pinned to the top in the block and also in the discovery section. So feel free to, let's just kind of keep that going. We'll put, I'd like to see like the newest gathering on top. And I'll just kind of keep my eyes on it for formatting and stuff. But feel free to just jot notes down. It doesn't have to be pretty or anything. Don't feel like hindered to do it because it needs to look a certain way. It would be a blessing to everybody if you just write down anything that you glean from today. And we'll kind of use that moving forward as just a way to bless our members and just remind ourselves of these things that we're going to talk about. And we're forgetful people, right? So we need to be reminded often of the things that we're learning. So yeah, and with that, I think we're gonna get started with Jana. Jana is has been a friend of mine for, I don't know when we met, Jana. I would think it's been about a year or so.
Yeah, that's probably accurate.
Yeah, but I think we knew of each other online for a while, and she reached out to me, and she and my husband Tim and I worked on a project together for her newly launched website. So when the writer's block was all kind of forming, I was like, I need Jana. She's got so much wisdom to share, and I'm just super, super blessed that she's just jumped in on this with me. And she teaches a workshop for writers, and I think that we'll talk more about that as we go on, but she's a writer and a blogger, but I'm not going to steal her thunder and give her intro away. So I'm just going to say, welcome to Jana. Welcome to the Writer's Block, and tell us a little bit about yourself and your journey and your involvement with writing.
Sure. So I live in Calgary, Alberta, Canada, and I have been a wife to my musician husband, Lee, for 25 years. And just a couple interesting tidbits about that. We did not date before we got married. Really? And from the day we met till the day we got married was 4 months. Wow. And I had my wedding dress before we were engaged.
Yeah. You must have known.
So I did know. Yeah. I can't say I recommend our method, but 25 years later, we're still married and we still love each other. And we have 3 adult children. We're actually about 2 months away from being empty nesters. Wow. One of our kids is married and one is engaged. So we're entering a new season of life. I have been a full-time freelance writer for about 6 years. And in addition to client work and writing for other websites and ministries, I write on my own website, janacarlson.com. I write for women who want to learn to love God's word and live it out. And I also write for writers who want to write for God's glory. I also serve at my church as the blog coordinator, an editor, and a writing mentor. And I'm also a blog coordinator for another ministry. And as Kara mentioned, I teach a writing workshop for people who want to write for God's glory. So my life kind of revolves around writing at this point.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Great. How did you get started, or did you always desire to do this, or is this something that fell into your lap?
so I've always loved writing, like from the time from the time I first learned to write the alphabet, like I've just always written. And my mom always encouraged me to write a book, but I secretly fantasized about that, but I never thought it would actually be a reality. I definitely never believed that I would be a writer. Like I did not envision that writing would be my career or anything like that. But I did, when blogs were first born in the early 2000s, I started a blog just kind of as a hobby, and I was very intrigued by that new online writing medium. And I blogged for quite a while, and I was quite successful at it. But I eventually set writing aside for about 10 years and didn't write anything. So yeah, definitely for that period, I did not think that writing would be a part of my future.
And so you had started a blog and it became somewhat successful, right? And then you set it aside.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that and why you felt the need to set something that was very successful to the side.
Right. As the blog grew, it became more demanding, and I loved every minute of it, but it was more and more time consuming, and I began to neglect my other roles and responsibilities as a wife and a mom. And writing actually became an idol. And I realized that I had to make some drastic changes in order to get my heart and my home in order. So after some wrestling with the Lord, I just let it go. I completely gave it up and focused on my family and just my own walk with the Lord for about 10 years.
I bet that was, I don't know, was that a hard thing to let go of, or maybe once you did it, it wasn't as painful as anticipated?
At first it was really hard because I loved it so much.
Yeah.
And it had actually become like a part of my identity. Like I was on my blog daily, and at that time, blogs were more active in the sense that there were lots of comments and stuff like that. Like it was almost more like social media in that way, because social media didn't exist yet. So like I connected with a lot of people. So it did feel like a very great loss. But I also learned contentment through that season. After a little bit of a struggle with my attitude, I realized that I just needed to embrace wherever God had me and whatever He wanted me to focus on. And so I just completely immersed myself in the things that He had set before me. And I just decided to bloom where I was planted, so to speak. Yeah.
I think that that's something that I know I've struggled with. I don't know if what it says about the personality type that is like all in on something, but that's kind of what I do too. And sometimes to the neglect of other things. And I think that is, I mean, we throw around the word balance a lot, and I've heard people say, oh, there's no such thing as balance. And I don't know if there is. I think that there are times in our own hearts and our own spirits where we can feel like something's not right. Like my children haven't been bathed in a few days, or the pantry is empty, or I don't know what it means for everyone else, but we can tell when there's something not right. And that's very typical of, like you said, an idol in our lives where we neglect the things that God's given us to do. And it's interesting that you're going to be talking more with us about that kind of elusive term of calling and what the calling really feels like for us as writers. So, what was there a certain thing that happened, or was it just that your kids had grown up a little bit more and you felt like it was now time to get back into it? Or what really kind of prompted that, where you felt like, oh, it's time, I feel like I can do this again?
So during that 10-year period where I wasn't writing at all, and I wasn't even really thinking about writing, our family went through a series of really intense trials and trauma, just one after the other. And God taught me a lot about himself through his word during that time. And it was actually a really spiritually rich time, despite how challenging it was. And eventually I started to get the itch for writing again, not necessarily because I wanted to relive my previous blogging experience, but I just really wanted to share what the Lord had taught me, and just our experience. Like, I just wanted to give him glory for what he had done in our lives. But I didn't do anything about it because I was afraid of falling back into idolatry. I didn't want to give into the temptation of becoming consumed by this desire to write. So I didn't do anything about it at all. I just prayed and waited on the Lord. And in the meantime, while I was seeking his direction, a neighbor hired me to do some casual data entry work for her. And after I'd worked with her for a while, she recognized my communication skills and suggested that I experiment with some business blogging on her website. And so I was totally thrilled. Like, the Lord had opened this door for me to kind of have an outlet for my writing. And not only was it something I enjoyed, but he was providing for us financially through it, which was way beyond anything I ever imagined possible. So that was a huge blessing. And it ended up really blessing her business and expanding into other types of writing for her business. And she ended up referring a bunch of her clients to me. And by 2017, I was busy enough with freelance clients that I gave up my job, and I've been freelance writing ever since. So again, that was totally the blessing of the Lord. That same year in 2017, I started my own personal blog, which was Wield the Word, which no longer exists, but some of you might have followed that. And I did that just kind of as a hobby, but it led to opportunities to write for some other online ministries and some devotionals, which eventually got published in a collaborative book. So it all kind of happened. I like to say it happened supernaturally, naturally. It wasn't something that I purposely was pursuing, but the Lord just opened doors and I walked through them. And it was definitely not something I could have envisioned or orchestrated myself.
Oh, that's so cool.
Yeah.
I love how the Lord works through those means and often gives people different skills outside of this space in which we're all expressing our creativity, which is on some, online platform. But often it's it comes from a series of other experiences that we gain, both good and bad and hard and wonderful all together, that brings us to this place where we feel ready to share. It's funny. I don't know if I've mentioned this here before, but I got started writing. It's so random. I wrote emails for a cigar company. And I learned, if you want to know anything about, cigars, I might know the answer. And I'm not a smoker. I know cigars, but it's just funny how those skills transferred into
Yeah.
what I'm doing today. So God is creative and uses all kinds of means. Can you all excuse me? My dog is scratching at the door really quick. So sorry. Try and keep the noise out, and then the noise comes in with me. So so let's kind of talk a little bit about just this idea of calling, and then you're going to talk to us more about this on Thursday. Members, just know that there's another follow-up session to today. That's Jana's solo teaching. She's going to dig in more to that on Thursday at the same time as today. But what would you say to somebody who's in some phase of the journey of writing? Maybe she's like you, has done it before, has left it, wants to return, maybe has never done it, has always thought about doing it, is doing it and wondering, like, is this something I just like, or is this something that God has called me to? Like, I think I've wondered that too sometimes, like, is this just something for me, or am I fulfilling something deeper here that God has?
I actually find that that's a really common kind of internal struggle. And I myself have wondered that, is this just my own selfish desire, or is this actually God's will and God's call on my life? And especially because of how my current writing life looks, it wasn't like there was this moment of like amazing revelation, like, ta-da, yes, you are called to write. And I feel like oftentimes when we are wondering God's will for our lives, as individuals, we personally want to know his will for us. We wish there was a verse in the Bible that just like spelled it out. Like, Jana, I have called you to be a writer. And that verse does not exist. And so, I don't know, I think we often just kind of flounder around, longing for this seemingly elusive answer. And I have come to the conclusion that we are overthinking it. The Bible tells us that God's will is not a mystery. In James 1 verse 5, it says that if we ask God for wisdom, he will give it to us. He is not, withholding his will for our lives from us. It's not a riddle that we're supposed to solve. He wants us to know his will for our lives. So we can start with the Bible. The Bible is God's revealed will. And in the Bible is everything we need to know to do what God has called us to do. And that's in 2 Peter 1 verse 3. So I think we're overthinking it. So I like to compare this to, in the spring, do you ask, has God called me to plant a garden? Most people don't ask that question. If you have the space, if you have the time, if you have the resources and you desire to garden, you just do it. You don't question whether or not it's God's will. So I wonder why, when it comes to writing, we treat it differently. David Mathis is a writer I deeply admire, and he outlines 3 questions or categories to help us identify a calling. And I find these very helpful and practical. So the first question is, do I desire it? This is aspiration. Do you enjoy writing? The second question is, has God gifted me for it? This is affirmation. And sometimes it comes from other people. You might have people in your life who have told you you're a good writer, or who are encouraging you to write, or just others have recognized your writing skills. And the third question is, has God opened the door? This is opportunity. So our pastor always says it's better to join the work God is already doing than to try to create your own opportunity from scratch. And this is certainly my own story of how the Lord led me to writing. He just opened doors and I walked through them, and here I am today. So my encouragement to anyone who's questioning the call to write for God's glory is, don't overthink it. If you enjoy writing, if you've been encouraged to write, or your writing skill has been affirmed, and if you have the opportunity to write, then just do it. I would say don't predetermine what the end result should be or what success looks like, but just follow God's lead day by day and be faithful with what he's put in front of you. Kara, you have a quote somewhere on the block. I can't remember where I saw it, but also from David Mathis, which I love. He said, writing is not the privilege of a few gifted Christian dignitaries, but an invitation to every believer. And I love the idea that we are actually invited to write for God's glory. So to anyone on the writer's block, I would just say, how will you respond to that invitation?
I love that. I love how you broke that down. I hope we're putting that in our collaborative notes, but the aspiration, do I desire it? The affirmation, are people noticing that in my own writing? And then the opportunity, is God giving you an opportunity in some way? And I think today, like more than ever before in history, we live in such a unique time and place. We are not bound by solely face-to-face interactions anymore, right? So we can create some of those own opportunities for ourselves by even creating our own blog or posting on social media, creating a Substack. There's so many ways that opportunity can come to us, or we can even create the opportunities ourselves. So I think that we live in a really neat time in history that we have that opportunity to do it, even if it's never even published necessarily, right? Like some writing is for public consumption, some of it is private. So we're talking mostly about sharing our words here, but I mean there is that opportunity also to just we write all the time, all day long, right? We're all writing, we're composing text messages and emails, and it's ubiquitous, it's everywhere. So that's really exciting that you kind of broke that down. And I also love that David Mathis quote. So that quote kind of talks a little bit about maybe the deeper issue that we have with writing, which is that imposter syndrome, like, who am I to write? And I think we've all heard a lot of times, like, who am I to call myself a writer? There's a lot of talk about, like, who do I think I am, or who does she think she is to think that she can write? So maybe you could talk to us a little bit about that. Like, what do you think about that kind of imposter syndrome? Have you dealt with that? And if so, how have you overcome that?
I absolutely deal with imposter syndrome on a daily basis. Even though I know I'm called to write, I'm very confident of that at this point. I definitely doubt that God has chosen the right person for the job. I frequently feel inadequate, I feel weak, and I have a very strong fear of failure. And this is a topic I cover in my writing workshop in greater depth, but one of the truths that encourages me in this area comes from the story of Moses in Exodus chapters 3 and 4, when God told Moses that Moses was going to lead God's people out of Egypt, and Moses had really legitimate concerns, like, I think you've picked the wrong guy. I'm not equipped for this. I have some real issues that should disqualify me from this position. Yeah, Moses was just completely convinced that God had made a mistake. And I feel that on a regular basis, but I love how God responded to Moses. His response was, I am. God refocused Moses's attention off himself and reminded Moses of who God is. And that reminder that my calling is not actually about me, it's about God. That helps me to just kind of forget about those areas where I know I'm weak and ill-equipped and inadequate, and just to trust that the Lord knows what he's doing, and he can get it done despite myself. So I just love that encouragement that my inadequacies do not disqualify me from fulfilling God's call on my life. So there's a lot more I could say about that.
Yeah,
I don't want to get carried away.
No, I love that. And I guess tune in on Thursday, right, for some more of that. But yeah, I wrote about this recently too, about the lies that we believe as writers, as that, we tend, like you said earlier, like your identity sometimes gets wrapped up in the work that we do. But I love, that's a great illustration of Moses, and God said, who made your mouth? Who made your tongue? Like, I made you this way. And probably God gave Moses that speech impediment so that it was so clear it was God working through Moses. And so in our own lives, we probably all have those areas of weakness that we are keenly aware of. And we think, how can God use me? And I think that's exactly the position we should be in, right? Like, that's a really good place, is for us to be like, okay, God, this isn't about me. This is about you. This is about the I am.
Yeah. I think there's also actually an element of pride there. Like, I think we often think of, oh, I feel so weak. And, we have this idea that it's actually really humble, but I think that there's an element of pride there, that we want to do things in a way where we feel comfortable and confident, and like we know that we can look good while we're doing it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so when we're weak, or we, doubt our ability, really, we're just afraid that we're going to make fools of ourselves. And that's just our focus is off, because it's not about us. And so, scripture has countless examples, and even verses that explicitly say, like, our weakness is actually how God is glorified. So he purposely does that so we can't be prideful, and we have to be dependent on him. Like you said, Kara, it really is the best place to be.
Yeah. And you know what I've realized too, like, the more self-conscious I am, the more I realize nobody's really paying that much attention to me, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think we think that fear of failure can hold us back from doing things because we're so afraid of what other people will think. Most people are so self-absorbed in their own things. They're not watching to see whether you fall on your face or not. And if you do, it's like, oh well, like, we think it's the end of the world, right? But really, nobody cares. We care so deeply. And I know there's so much we learn even in that failure, right? We learn so much more. So
it's so true.
It's good reminder. Well, can you tell us a little bit more? You've mentioned your writing workshop. We'll talk a little bit about this, and then I hope you guys will stick around. We'll have some Q&A for Jana. But tell us a little bit about your writing workshop and some of the things that you cover. And if you're looking for more inspiration or kind of foundation building to your own writing, I think Jana's workshop is probably a great place to start. So
Sure.
it's about that.
So my workshop is called Writing for God's Glory. It's only 3 sessions. Each session is 90 minutes, and it includes a time of teaching and breakout discussion groups and a practical takeaway and homework. So it's jam-packed full of rich content. I was inspired to create this workshop because I was seeking answers to questions a lot of Christian writers ask, but I had trouble finding resources that were from a biblical, Christ-centered perspective. And I firmly believe that the Bible has all the answers that we need. And so I was just kind of frustrated and thought, like, this is ridiculous. I am going to find these answers in the Bible and I'm going to write them down. And so that's what I did. And it turned into this workshop. And so we look at what the Bible has to say about writing and how it answers questions common to Christian writers. Questions like, am I called by God to write, as we talked about today? How do I deal with imposter syndrome? How exactly do I write for God's glory? And what exactly am I supposed to write? And how do I deal with writer's block?
BLOCK. Just kidding.
Yeah. And is it wrong to try building a platform as a Christian writer? We look at platform building according to Jesus and his disciples. So, yeah, each session is full of lots of spiritual encouragement and exhortation, Bible study. And then the practical takeaways are to help you learn and grow as a writer. And the homework is stuff that you can implement immediately. I do not want to overwhelm my workshop attendees. Everyone is busy. So the homework is very customizable to your schedule. If you can do none of it, you'll still glean valuable information you can implement immediately. But if you can do all of it, that's fantastic. So it's really whatever you can manage. So my next online workshop, it's on Wednesday mornings at the same time as this session we're having now. So I believe that's 10 Pacific time. It starts on April 12th. So 3 Wednesdays in a row, April 12th, 19th, and 26th. And maybe should I put the link in the chat?
Feel free to put it in the chat, and we'll put this in our notes as well. So I think, members, this would be a great thing to check out. This is really right in the same lane that we're traveling here on the Writer's Block. I love all those topics, and I think Jana has such a sweet and gentle way of teaching. I think that will be a real blessing to everyone. I'm wondering, and this is putting you a bit on the spot, maybe you could, the name of your workshop is Write for God's Glory, but maybe you could tell us, because sometimes we throw these words around and we assume that as believers, we're all speaking the same language, but what does it mean? If you could kind of, sum it up, what does it mean to write for God's glory? What is this idea of glory, and how can we be a part of that in our writing? I know that's a big question.
Yeah. To sum it up, well, I guess I would say we want to point our readers to him instead of ourselves. One thing I like to emphasize in my workshop is that you do not have to write Bible studies to write for God's glory. So I like to encourage all writers of all genres and in different contexts that it is possible to glorify God in your writing. And I definitely go into more depth about that in the workshop. But yeah, I would say ultimately it is just that you're pointing people to him instead of yourself.
Yeah, that's great. I think that's
Mhm.
great. And so it really opens up the whole spectrum of your interests as a writer. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to be writing Christian devotionals or a Bible study. You could be writing works of fiction. You could be writing a memoir. You could be writing cigar ads, you guys.
Yeah. Yeah. I actually talk about that, how to glorify
I,
God in the marketplace.
yeah. I
Yeah.
think it just opens the whole spectrum up for us. So that is really sweet. Well, I think we're gonna stop the interview session here. I'm going to remind you guys to tune in on Thursday at 10 Pacific time for Jana's solo teaching, where she's going to talk to us more about the whole idea of calling. But if you guys want to unmute yourselves, if you have any comments or questions for Jana, now's the time. Someone asked earlier what that quote was from David Mathis. Do you have that on hand,
Yeah.
Jana?
I will.
Stacy did. It's on the mywritersblock.com too at the bottom. So
Oops. Sorry, let me do that again.
does anyone have any thoughts or questions about this whole idea of calling in our writing?
I was in and out. I apologize, but I think Jana, you said something about God is not withholding His will from us in the process. Could you just circle back and explain that again? I heard that and my ears peaked up, and then I was out again for a minute. But I love that because He doesn't. But how does it relate to writing?
Yeah, so I base that on James 1 verse 5, which is if anyone asks for wisdom, God will grant it liberally. And that the Bible is God's revealed will. So we have everything we need to know in the Bible in order to live out God's call on our lives, including writing. And so I basically was saying we're overthinking it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you. I agree. That's sufficient. It's sufficient.
Yeah. What a great tool we have to communicate, right? That we have this means of communication that crosses all kinds of boundaries, and we can just do it, right? We can just do it. I like that, Jana. I liked your illustration of we don't overthink whether or not we're going to plant a garden, right? We just go and we do it. And yeah. And I think that kind of goes back to that whole idea of, can I call myself a writer? Well, I heard someone say once, well, do you write? Well, yeah. Okay, well, then you're a writer.
Yes.
I think that's another thing we overcomplicate is am I qualified to call myself a writer? Well, I think you write. So therefore you can call yourself a writer. So
yeah. I think that goes back to part of my encouragement is not to have a predetermined idea of what success as a writer looks like. I think that we have this idea that in order to call ourselves a writer, we have to have a book published or something. Yeah. Our definition of writer is very small. And I think maybe we need to expand or change our expectations of ourselves as writers.
Yes. It's that verse that and I'm going to butcher it. Somebody probably knows it, but some plant and some water, but God gives the increase, right? And so that is the thing of with our success. You might be a planter, you might be a reaper, but God is the one who gets the glory, like you were saying earlier. So it's about making much of him.
Yeah.
Also I wanted to say that it's interesting how Jana was talking about how she opened a blog and then closed it and worked in something different, and then she opened another blog and closed that one too, and now she's doing something else. I think that in our calling, I think we need to understand also God's timing, for our lives. And it is interesting how I downloaded that seasons of, what was it called? Seasons of
Creativity.
yeah.
Yeah.
And I haven't looked through it well, but I was thinking about it, how we go through different seasons and how God uses our calling differently according to the seasons of our lives, but also according to the needs of his kingdom, what our ministry is towards. Like right now, even though I would love to write in English, God has me writing in Spanish, and that's really what the kingdom needs, my ministry needs, the people that I work with needs right now. So I write in Spanish, and the time will come when I will start writing in English again.
Right.
And but it's I think we need to be sensitive to that too. I think that we are called. If we are called, it doesn't mean that that we have to go full force in every direction at once, when it talks about, writing, like I tend to do, I like to do the blogging and the YouTube and the podcast and everything that goes along with it. And I love everything. I love it. But it's not just about ourselves, about us, if it's a calling and a gifting from God, it's not meant to be for us alone. I mean, it's a blessing. Of course, we are blessed, but God has given that gift to us to bless the body, to bless God's kingdom, and to reach others for Christ. So we need to be sensitive to when that season is, so.
That's a really good point. I think too, just because you're capable of doing all of those things doesn't mean you're called to do all of those things. And so I think that will probably be something you talk about more, huh, Jana?
Yeah. And that was actually something when I was first hired by my neighbor and I was writing for her business website. As blessed as I was to be able to write as a source of income, I did not enjoy writing about finances and business practices and all that stuff. I mean, I did it, and there were certain times where the topic was more interesting than others, but it felt like a long season of very unfulfilling writing. And because my heart desired a different kind of writing, I wanted to write explicitly, God-focused words. But God used that season in a very important ways to equip me for the work that I do today. So it wasn't a wasted season. It was training ground for me, and it was, it was kind of practice, and there were all kinds of blessings that came from it. But I can relate to what you're saying, Gloria, about, you're writing in Spanish when you really want to write in English. And I think the Lord sometimes has us in those less enjoyable writing seasons, but there's a purpose in them.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah, it's really true. Like our calling doesn't necessarily mean that we are absolutely loving doing everything that we're doing at the time. That's a good point, because I think we do think of calling as like, oh, I'm doing exactly what I want to do the way I want to do it. But sometimes that calling is serving people in a way that is not your first priority. You're serving your family by writing about finances, or you're writing in Spanish when you'd rather be writing in English. But all of that God is using to bless, provide, encourage, exhort, educate others. So yeah, that's a really good point.
I think we have this romanticized picture of what it means, to be called to write. Like, it's like, the American dream, like I'm living the dream. Like some people would say, I am living the dream. My weekdays are literally consumed with writing related work, but it's not what people dream about. Like, it's hard and not always enjoyable. So I
Not
think
always
sometimes we need a
glamorous.
bit of a wake-up call.
Yeah, that's
Yeah.
such a good point. Just such a good reminder that we can be faithful in those seasons of doing the work that must be done, right? And being joyful in the work that must be done. It might not be the work that we choose to do necessarily all the
Yeah.
time, but being faithful in those small things can lead to being faithful in other things. So that's a
Yeah.
Any other thoughts, questions, comments for Jana?
Jana, your story reminds me a bit of, I live in Waco, Texas, so all things Magnolia. And before the silos were ever built, my husband had to come here for business, and we didn't live here yet, but he was, he lived here as a young boy, and we would come here for business. And I can remember standing at the top of a hotel that was overlooking the site where Magnolia would end up being. And I had read Joanna's little blog, and she had a little blog, and she was just faithfully writing. And recently I picked up the book that she most recently wrote, and she talked about how basically for 10 years they had opened a shop. She was writing a blog, and she came into a season where they had to close the shop. And, I know for me, I would really prefer it if things were linear. Wouldn't that be lovely? Just if things were linear. And, this past week, right up until probably this morning, I was like, I was progressing in my writing. Now I'm not. I haven't really been able to write since December. I've got a daughter getting married. I've got, we've got a lot of big family issues, good things and really hard things going on. And I'm like, oh God, you must be closing the store for me. And I sat this morning and just prayed. I had said in the notes a week or two ago that was the one thing I was going to do, is I was going to pray. And this morning I said, Lord, what do you want me to do? And I've been kind of ignoring the things going on in writer's block because just much. And that was the thing that I just felt God say, just show up today at this class, give 1 hour this week, and this is what you'll give. And you just, literally the things you said were things that were right out of my devotions this morning. I popped that quote in there from Henry Blackaby, see where the Lord is at work and join him there. And then something that I have heard this probably 4 times in the last 2 days or 3 days, this quote that I don't think I've heard in like 5 or 6 years. And it's that bloom where you're planted. And I'm like, that's so 10 years ago. But God has been reminding me of that over and over again. And that sense of, of stepping into the work that is already going on, that God is already doing, and just being willing, because it is for his glory. And that was something I was praying over this morning is, Lord, just check my heart, because I know myself, and I know that I'm the kind of girl that's easy to pride, and starting to forget that he made the whole of me, my brain, my hands, everything that it takes to write, and to do any other thing on earth. And so I appreciate how, what you had to say in your story, and how valuable it is just to remember the process that God has us in, and to step into it. I needed that this morning. So,
Thank you for sharing that, Stacey.
much thanks.
That's so great. That's what this is all about. And so I'm so glad that you came and you made the sacrifice and were encouraged. That blesses me too, Stacey. So thank you for sharing. Yeah. And yeah, the whole magnolia thing, right? Like sometimes God sometimes explodes our small things, and sometimes we're to just stay faithful in the small things. And I think Jana said that earlier, like stop having preconceived notions of what your writing journey or what success looks like for you. Stop comparing yourself to other people. I need that reminder all the time. Like my journey is my journey, and it's not necessarily like hers. So trust God with that.
My computer is being really stupid this morning. It might have to do with our operator issues, but anyway, I just wanted to just put a plug in for that book that Stacey was just talking about, The Stories We Tell by Joanna Gaines. It speaks to the heart of the writer. It is so good. I listened to it. I'm going to listen to it again. She says, read it slow and take notes, but she addresses all of those things, like the imposter syndrome and the calling, letting things become our idols, whether it's your work or whatever, realizing that your family's losing out. She really hits all of the points that I know. For me, it was a very, it was like, in fact, it was what she just wrote about was what I was writing in my own personal writing at the time. It was just very, very meaningful. So I would really highly encourage you guys to read that or listen to that book. I just checked it out on the Hoopla or Libby app and listened to it as I was working in the yard and running errands and stuff. It's really good. So
That's great. Thanks for that, Carrie. All right, everyone, thank you so much for being here today and for showing up, for giving yourself this time. And oh, Gloria, did you want to say something?
Just a question. Tell us again about Thursday. What was that? What's going on?
Yes. Okay. So our normal setup will be this Tuesday teaching. Well, don't say that. The gathering. And so it will be more of an interview type format with each of our teachers every week. And then our teacher is also going to host a solo teaching on another day. It won't always be Thursday, but Jana has chosen Thursday at 10. Melissa has chosen a different time, and then Amy will choose a different time. And so just keep your eye on the gathering for those solo teachings. You'll see an image with just their face, and that will not include me as an interviewer type style. They'll have the Zoom screen and probably some slides to go through, and she's going to go into more detail on this idea of being called in our work as writers. So that's going to be Thursday, and then you'll probably see her one more time this week. So Jana will be in view of us this week. So I encourage you to, reach out to her, ask questions in the block, but engage with this material this week. This is what we're going to be talking about this week. And then next week is a really beautiful kind of building block on top of this topic, where Melissa's going to talk about crafting a vision statement for our work as writers. So there's kind of an incremental approach to the way the teachers have been laid out this season. So this week that's kind of what we want to focus our attention on, is this idea of calling, and Jana's gonna lead us through that. So sorry I didn't explain that earlier, but that's kind of the format going forward. Okay, so yeah, RSVP to that in the gathering, or there will be a replay of that as well. All right. Well, thank you guys again for being here. Thank you, Jana, so much for all of your wisdom that you've shared with us. I'm sure that was just a real blessing, and more to come.
Yeah, looking forward to Thursday.
Yeah. All right. God bless you all. Have a great day.
Thanks, guys.
Bye-bye.